One more.
John and I were, we hadn't been married very long. Megan had been born, but he said, I really would like a place up north, preferably on water someplace, and expressed that to a friend of ours who had the knowledge to be able to help us look for that. And about a year later, came up with this beautiful piece of property of which I bought for him sight unseen. I bought it on the spot because I knew it was perfect, and it's really become the major part where most of the big decisions are made, where family decisions are made, where discussions and futures are talked about. It's really the heartbeat of the family, that place is, and it's a wonderful place. And it also revitalizes my husband. It cares for him in a way that, myself and the family really can't. We head up there almost immediately. He'll come during normal times, he'll come home on maybe a Thursday night or a Friday morning, work a few hours, then we'll head up there. And he spends a lot of recesses up there, not every recess, but a lot of them up there, because it's just such a restful place for him. He rests, he thinks, he kind of collects himself, and whatever issues are at hand, of course, thinks through them and works through them. Too. We headquartered up there. We, as I said, all of our big decisions were made up there, and it has become what the people that surround us call, the good place. That's where they want to go to talk to him, because they know no one's distracted, and we can really talk and think through things and do it in a way that's fun. Oh my. It was late 70s, and I was a school teacher. I was a teacher of special education at the time, and it was spring break for education in Arizona, and my parents and I went out to Hawaii on spring break. And we'd had a friend at that time that was a mutual friend of the SINCPAC Admiral and a few people out there, and we were on occasion, were invited to a reception that was being held for a group of United States senators on their way through Hawaii to China. And we were invited, and I met him there. I had heard about him, obviously, through just because of his reputation and, of course, his heroism. But we'd had a friend that was kind of hoping that we would meet, I think, in a small way. And I don't know what he said, but it was love at first sight for me. I dropped over dead. I really did. And I liked his humor. I love his intelligence. And I just enjoyed the fact that he was so down to earth. So for me, it was very definitely love at first sight. Well, I had heard about him primarily because of our relationship with our friend through SINCPAC. During the time that he was a prisoner of war, I'll be very honest with you, I did not know anything about him. I was in high school, and I learned about him later on, and learned about the plight of the POWs later on as well. I was young and kind of dumb in those days in high school, so I didn't pay much attention. But what an amazing man. I mean, what an amazing man. And I thought that when I met him, I didn't know what to expect. He introduced himself to me, and I just didn't know what to expect. And what I saw was just this incredible human being. It's a lot of fun to be around. John and I we're not exactly candid about our ages. John made himself younger, and I made myself older. And how we found out our true ages was in Arizona at that time, they published applications for marriage licenses in the newspaper. And that's where I saw his age, and he saw mine. It's still funny to this day, and as he says, started a marriage on a tissue of lies. But yeah, I was so enamored with him. I thought, oh my gosh, if he really finds out how young I am, this is a no-go. And he thought the same thing. He thought, I never saw age in him. I never even, the subject of age just never entered my mind, because he's so young acting and so incredibly vibrant that age never even entered the question for me at all. He was 44 and I was 24. So I was 24 when I met him. Maybe 25. I have to think for a second. He went over and asked my father permission to take me for a drink after the reception, and my dad, who was a very tall Western man, said, "You've got my daughter there," and kind of did one of these with him, and I don't think anyone had done that to John in a long time. So it wasn't that they were skeptical of him, but the age difference, I think, was concerning in the beginning, certainly. Just talking, he had some incredible stories, not just war stories, but just his life stories, and I was fascinated by hearing all of that. He used to be he would tell me some of the books that he told as stories in prison. So, as you know, they told stories, they told movies, they told, news. They'd make news up, of course, but they did all kinds of things like that. And he repeated some of those to me, which were unbelievable. They were fascinating. I felt very inadequate. I had only young stories. John can have fun just about any place. He really can. He's a man that respects and loves life to its absolute fullest, and makes every second count. So he can be in whatever a tough day has been, and somewhere there's a ray of light and some smiles and a joke or two in that. And I have always admired that in him. He reminds me not to take things too seriously. It's what's been presented to us. So don't take it too seriously. Learn from it and have fun with it also. He likes being surrounded by interesting people and fun people, and he always has. And I've had people say to me, well, doesn't that bother you sometimes? No, not at all. I've loved every minute of it. He's engaging, and he loves to learn from other people, and a weekend at our cabin would not be complete without a gaggle of whoever, whatever, is coming along. It's fun, and it's interesting, and it's exciting, and it's something that we love to do, and he especially loves the engagement and the discussions and the talking. That's the one thing through the years that I've been a little frustrated with, because when he does get home, he doesn't want to, I'll be like, God, what happened? Tell me the back scene. And he won't really want to talk about it, because he wants to get away from it. That's why he comes home. And I've learned to accept that. I think people have this idea that we somehow sit and pontificate the incredible events of the day, and we don't. We talk family stuff, the normal stuff that couples do and families do. What's going on, which child did what, at the time. So, yeah, he loves sports. I mean, so watching sports is a big deal to him. I mean, he really loves it and is very, very good. He's in his next life. We keep saying he's going to be a sports commentator someplace, but he loves it and loves having people around, and consequently, so do I. I didn't expect it. I really didn't think that he would propose. He was older. I just didn't know what to expect. I mean, I knew he cared very deeply for me. I did know that, but I didn't expect it. And he was not matter of fact, but why don't we do this? Why don't we get married? Like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm in. that's just the way he is. You know, he's very sentimental, but he's also matter of fact in a lot of ways. You know, and I think a lot of that has to do with his imprisonment. But he is a romantic person, but you'd never see it. I've seen it, but you'd never see it. He takes things very to the heart, not just issues, but people. He worries about people. He worries about events that have happened. One I can specifically, and it was a long time ago, but the bombing of the airport in Beirut, where the Marines were here in the 80s, when this is during Reagan's presidency, really troubled him for a long time because he had advocated against putting the Marines there, and it just broke his heart that we lost some of our men for a reason that could have been avoided in his mind. Well, we had a few senators in the wedding. We had, it was a big wedding. I'm an only child, so I let my parents run wild with it. I wasn't going to stop them because I'm the only one. So it was a wonderful spring, summer, almost summer day in Arizona, and 5 o'clock wedding. It couldn't have been more perfect, and it couldn't have been a more perfect evening afterwards. It's just, it was fairy tale for me. I think it was for him a little bit too, but it was fairy tale. And something that I'd never dreamed of a wedding. You know, that wasn't what I did, was dream about getting married or anything. But in fact, when I met John, I'd kind of given up on dating because I was kind of sick of the college guys and I just didn't want to do it anymore. It was too much trouble. So my wedding day was just glorious. It was wonderful. No, he hadn't retired yet. He was still active duty, but he didn't want that. He loved tradition, but didn't want to quite do that. So that was fine. My father particularly, my father was a World War II vet, had been a B-17 bombardier, and had been shot down 3 times. And the third time he landed in the English Channel. And so even though my father wasn't captured, they had a great deal in common in terms of the experiences of being shot down, the experiences of combat, all those things. And my father so respected John for just who he was and his service. And you know, I'm not saying my dad would stand at attention when he'd come in the room, but my dad would straighten up, and so would my husband, for that matter, with my dad. They were very, very good friends, and it was a nice thing to watch. Well, my father, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of many, was the true American dream. He came from absolutely nothing. They were dirt poor. When the war broke out, lied about his age and his education, and was able to get into the Army Air Corps as a cadet, became an officer, and became a bombardier on a B-17, and was stationed in England. He flew with the Memphis Belle Squadron. That was his squadron. And so when he came home, he had the kind of gravitas that so many of those men had that he didn't appreciate, nor did he wear outwardly, of being someone who was solid and good. And he went into business. He did several businesses, one with my uncle, and then finally got into the liquor business at home, worked for a wholesaler, and then was offered the brand of beer that absolutely nobody wanted. It was a terrible seller. Ooh, you can have it. And that was Anheuser-Busch. And the rest is history. My mother and father had to sell everything they had to scrape up the $10,000 to get the line. And they did, and the rest is history. My father gave my mother and I a beautiful life, everything we could ever have wanted. And so, I mean, I grew up in the best of circumstances, and someone who was able to appreciate the effort that my parents, both my parents, put into making a life that was so glorious. Some people say there was never an option when he retired. I knew, I felt he had some political ambitions, although he hadn't really outwardly said it to me, but I knew that he was good at what he does. He was engaged in Washington. He was a smart thinker. So the natural thing for us to do was to come to Arizona, and my father offered him a job, full knowing that he probably wouldn't stay because he would go on to bigger and better things. But it was a genuinely loving thing my father did, and my husband was, of course, truly grateful, and that really was where he was able to launch his political career. It gave him the opportunity to get around Arizona, get around the valley, meet people, and then go from there. My mother and father have been not hardcore Democrats, we call them Arizona Democrats, which is really Republican in disguise. But they re-registered absolutely instantaneously, and they never looked back. It was a good fit. It really was. We got a phone call, and it was not from his mother, it was from somebody in the Navy, and I don't remember who now. But they'd been coming back from Europe, and they were on board a C-5. I don't know if you've ever seen a C-5, but it's enormous. I mean, it's the biggest thing I've ever seen. And he died on board the C-5 on the way back. And so when my husband, we hadn't even been married a year, and my husband and I went out to Andrews to meet the plane late that night, and it was cold. I remember being cold, and we had to climb like 3 sets of stairs to get to the top deck where he was and where my mother-in-law was. And no one ever wants this kind of insight into a family, but what I observed with their family was a family of great strength, great honor, great dignity in a time that was so compellingly horrible. I mean, it's the worst thing you can imagine. And so we newlyweds together had to kind of work through that, and then my husband had retired just during that week, and so finished the retirement process during the days of the funeral, and we left the next day to go home. That's a lot to absorb for someone, and John did it beautifully, but it was his family is just amazing. When you really see what people are made of during times like that, you really do. It is a Navy family that he talks about, and it's the Navy traditions and honor that really, I think, not only held them together but gave them great strength. That John was John's father was second generation at that time. There was a break, and Army was mixed in there a little bit, but this lineage goes all the way back to George Washington's staff in the military. It's not something you see every day. John's mother was the backbone in that family. She had to hold it together when he was deployed and gone, as men, in those days, men were deployed a great deal. It wasn't that we had to deal with it on a daily basis, but we had to be supportive of her. And with that said, I mean, she was, I don't know if you've met her, but she's of great stoicism when it comes to not showing feelings or being emotional in any way. But she dealt with that herself on a daily basis. And he was, like so many of those men, their life was the military, their whole life was. And when they retire, of course, it becomes different issues come into play. And that was very much the case with his father. And I know it was difficult on his mother. But with that said, his mother and father were two of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. His father was a real gentleman and a real kind human being, always to me. in the case of his grandfather and his father too, his grandfather had given it all. It was World War II, and it was a very difficult war because we didn't have all the technology. For many, war is always difficult, but we didn't have the technology that we have now and all the things. So it was really a hand-to-hand war. And it just took it out of him. All those men were in difficult shape when the war ended. As for John's father, I mean, he obviously ordered the bombing over Hanoi with his son being imprisoned. I mean, I can't even imagine what that did to him. I really don't. I know every Christmas he'd go up to the DMZ zone, or I guess as far as you could go, probably not a DMZ zone, but as far as you could go, and have Christmas with the troops and be as close to John as he could get. I don't have any, and 5.5 years of that, I don't know what that does to a human. I don't know how you survive that. The funeral was held, I believe, at Fort Meade, I think is where it was held, if I remember correctly. And he was taken by caisson across the bridge and into Arlington Cemetery. And the only other time I'd ever seen a caisson was on TV with President Kennedy. It's a very overwhelming sight, to me it was. And we went to the burial where he's at, and many other of his relatives were in there. I didn't know that when we got there. I just assumed it was where he would be, but John's uncles were there, his grandfather. I mean, they're all in there, and so that elevated what this was all about. Not that death isn't difficult enough, but the legacy and the honor and everything. It overwhelmed me a little bit. It was my reality of what I had married into, and this wonderful family. But the importance of legacy and tradition was never more apparent to me than that day. And John was, well, certainly upset. I mean, without due, but he was just so strong for everyone. He really was. His mother's strong too, but John was he's the one that carried the mantle of strength that day. I was very sorry for him, but very proud of him too. I don't know if he's been back since then, since the burial. I have. I took my sons there a few years ago. So I obviously never asked John if he'd gone with or without us at all at any time. But I know what it means to him. I know what Arlington means to him, and I know what that day and where their place is. It's a very prominent place, what that means to him. John made it for Megan's birth, yes, which was great. And he was, this is a 50s guy, and I drug him into the delivery room, because I'm a 80s girl at that time, and so it was wonderful. I mean, obviously, as any birth is for any couple. He did not make Jack's birth, though. He missed it by about an hour. His plane was delayed, and I'd gone into labor unexpectedly, so. None of these were planned. I mean, in terms of, we didn't have a C-section on purpose to be able to plan a day. And so he didn't make it for Jack's, and that's bothered him ever since, I think. Made it for Jimmy, and I'm grateful that he was, because Jimmy was our troublesome baby when he was born. He was born early. He was very ill. And John had to come into my room. I'd had a C-section, and we'd gone to go see him in the nursery and pray with him, and our pastor was there, and because he was very ill. And John, I'll never forget, John came back into the room and shut the door and said, "We're going to lose him." And he couldn't look at me, and I couldn't look at him because I thought I'd failed him. And that's not at all what happened, but I never want to feel like that again. And so he was so strong and so helpful it's the helpful's not even a word that's strong enough for that, but he just, I saw another side of him that was truly eloquent and elegant in terms of how he dealt with it. Jimmy's fine, but I felt that way again when he left for war. So it was like, I swore I'd never want to feel it again, but we did. And of course, Bridget, I surprised him with Bridget. I was working in Bangladesh, and I, had taken some doctors and some nurses there to do some orthopedic stuff, and actually wound up in the cholera clinics and everything else there. And a friend of ours from Phoenix had said, look, if you get a chance, go to Mother Teresa's orphanage. They probably need help. So on the weekend, I grabbed a couple of friends that were doctors and nurses and said, let's go. You want to go with me on an adventure? And it took all day to find the orphanage because it's in a really old part of Dhaka, which is unmarked and no one knows. And, anyway, so we started going every other day because it was kind of hard to get there, but about every other day. And we were there 3 weeks. And this little girl who had a terrific cleft palate and a number of other problems, along with another baby who had a heart problem. I don't know where it came from, but all of a sudden I thought, I can get these two kids help. I can do this. What a sassy thing to say, But so I went to our embassy, told them what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring them back for health care. Perfectly fine. In those days, they had visa stamping machines, so that's another part of the story. But anyway, it took me about 4 days to get a passport for each of these babies and then get the visas out. On the day that we were supposed to leave, the health ministry in Bangladesh called and said, you need to appear in front of the ministry group in an hour. And I'm thinking, there's one flight a week in there from where we could get to. And so my mind is like, oh my God, we got to get to the airport, and this kind of stuff. Well, they pulled me in and said, they were kind of chatting back and forth. They're chatting in Hindi. And I'm, okay, I'm not being disrespectful, but I'm kind of thinking, what's going on here? And so finally, one of the ministers looks up and he goes, we can help these babies right here. And me, being the neurotic traveler that I am, slammed my fists on the table, and then I said, God damn it, then do it. Why haven't you done it? And I think I scared them because they started talking again. Stamp, 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 she's out. Get her out of here. We were literally stamping the kids' visas in their passports on the way to the airport, in the back of the van. And I realized, when I was on, I'm on this flight, I've got these two babies, I have a friend helping me, and I'm looking at Bridget and I'm thinking, I can't give her up. What have I done? I can't hand her to somebody. The other baby went with some very good friends of ours, and I literally got off the plane and handed my husband his new daughter. And I got to say, that's a test of a marriage. He never balked, he never wavered. He said, bring her on. Welcome home. But so that's how he met his fourth child with us, our fourth together. We were both very busy, and to me, what I was doing, we started doing it because there was an earthquake in a place that I had known, and it was a remote island that John and I traveled to anyway, and I was embarrassed because it was a trust territory of the United States, and what I saw were, rats in the OR and no beds and all this, and I was embarrassed. So I thought, well, we can send equipment, and so that's how it all started. And then I realized that there was something in me that was driving this. I don't know what it is to this day, but it's something I know I need to have. I have to do it. It's part of what makes me happy. And so that's really how it got started. He's very evident in all of the kids, older ones too. Very evident in them. In our case, with Megan, we call Megan McCain John McCain in a dress, because she has his tenaciousness, his drive, his ferocity on things, his temper on occasion. She's very much John McCain. In his boys, I see, in Jack, the older boy, I see his respect and honor for our country. Our others do too, but Jack carried it differently because it's his name. And so I saw in Jack never wanting to say you had to go to the Naval Academy, realizing that he had to go to the Naval Academy because it was part of who we are. And doing it well and honoring it and still in the Navy and still being, still serving our country. And in Jimmy, I see a combination of everything. I see a little of me. I see a little of my father. We call him my father reincarnated, actually. And then his father, because of his voracious love for reading. He's probably the most well-read reader of anybody I've ever met, my son. So he's in all of them in one way or another. Our son Jimmy joined the Marines at age 17. We had to sign, and this is the height of the surge. And as you know, deployed with the Marine Corps. While John was running for president of the United States, he deployed. I've had some tough times before, but all a mother wants to do is talk about their son serving, you just want to tell everybody and then talk about it because it makes it easier. And I couldn't say a word because we would have endangered him. And so he served his country well and is now in the Army Guard. He's a good kid. Yeah. Well, when John was first elected, and we started having children, it was a conscious decision by both of us to raise our children in Arizona. We knew there was going to be a huge sacrifice, mainly for him, because he's the one that had to commute. With that said, he never missed a weekend. He missed some midweek, plays and, t-ball games and all that kind of stuff. But the way I portrayed it to the kids, of course, you could see him on TV, you could do that, is that I portrayed it in kind of a deployed manner. He's serving his country, he's away, he has to be away, but you'll see him on the weekends. You'd have to ask them, but I don't think they outwardly ever thought they were being denied their father at all, in any way. He was really diligent about it. It wasn't always easy for him, and it wasn't always easy for me, too. Friday would hit, Thursday or Friday, whenever he would come home, and Friday would hit, and I'd be hanging from the ceiling from having had him all week, And then, of course, they turned into instant angels when he walked through the door. It's like, really? These aren't my kids. An hour ago, you were fighting. So, yeah, but he never wavered on that. I can't complain about that at all. We were given the opportunity to travel with the Today Show on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. So we started in Hanoi with Matt Lauer and the group, and went to the prison, saw the places, listened to his dad reminisce. It was important for John, in his mind, and I believe so, to show Jack what had happened. Because there are several lessons in that, not just what happened to him, but what happened as a result of this occasionally mismanaged war. I don't mean to make light of this, and I don't want to be political here, because that's not what this is about. But we wanted Jack to understand that with sacrifice can come just what happened to his father, danger. And I think it was a really fun trip for Jack. And it was also very eye-opening. There's a particular picture, hopefully I can give it to you. It's of Jack standing with his arms like this, and that he was touching both walls of his cell, of his dad's cell. That was the one thing that Jack still remembers that was the most poignant for him. And then seeing a place that John described in the prison where he had been, but where Dol Moi, the former leader of Vietnam, had been and escaped from. So it's It's a huge history. And then being able to go on to Saigon with everyone and see the other side of what occurred, and talking to some of the reporters that had been there, and then doing the Today Show live in the square, which was for us. And Jack did it with his dad. No family ever gets those kind of opportunities. I think we're very unique in that respect. And let me also mention, showing Jack the monument on the lake in Hanoi and the humor in it, because, as you know, it says John McCain, U.S. Air Force, Major in U.S. Air Force on it, and, depicts him as being a traitor and all that kind of stuff. Being able to show Jack that also. John was able to see it through Jack's eyes, which was, I think, very, very bonding for the two of them. And since then, we've taken all of our kids to the prison in Hanoi and gone all over Vietnam as a result. It's a gorgeous country, and my husband enjoys it, as do we. It was fun. It was interesting. We came home, as I said. He started speaking to various Rotary clubs. His reputation preceded him, and so there were a lot of people curious about him and wanting him to come to speak to various civic organizations and things like that. And so it kind of began there, and it grew. It was very easy to tell that people wanted him to go into something, public in that respect, and it was. I didn't have to say anything. There was a wave of people that wanted him to run. And so the decision was easy. What did I know? I was young. I didn't have kids. This looked exciting to me. So, because I thought I thought I had married a naval officer that would be in the Navy the rest of his life. And so this was a different turn for me. Your first election, obviously, is your first campaign and first election is the one you remember the most. And I draw on experiences. I have drawn on them through the various years of campaigning. It was tough. We were running for what had then was John Rhodes' seat. He had retired. So it was an East Valley urban district that was small. It was District 1. It was heavily Mormon. It was heavily, old Arizona kind of thing. So one of the first things I remember, a snide remark, which is always the things you remember, was a gentleman at a Rotary Club that said, well, you're not from Arizona. You've never lived, you're not a native. What do you know about Arizona? You're not a native Arizonan. And he said, the longest place I've ever lived in my life is Hanoi. That shut him down. And I just thought, yes, that was great. But it's things like that. We had to work hard. It was literally door to door. He and I would work one side of the street. He'd work the other side of the street in the heat in Arizona in the summer. But that paid off because he got about as many votes as doors we knocked on that summer. He beat an incumbent state legislator. He beat another man who was a great civic person in the city of Mesa. People saw something different in him and someone that would be a great leader and is a great leader. Okay, election night was, it was crazy. It was raining like hell outside, which is very unusual for Arizona. It was raining and it was, and you're jammed in this little tiny dirty headquarters that we had in this strip mall in Mesa, Arizona. And it was a long night because, as usual in Arizona, the machines broke down, so the numbers were coming in very slowly. So it was late when we found out. And we're in a little bit of disbelief, actually, even though our numbers had shown that we were doing well. In those days, we operated our side of the campaign with one pager. We didn't have cell phones. We had a pager. I don't know how you could do that now, but and so it was jammed in there. It was jammed with friends, family, and he won. The primary was, winning the primary, for all intents and purposes, won the election because it was a heavily Republican district. So it was winning that primary that was probably the biggest thing I'll ever remember. He liked many parts of it. I mean, yes, of course, he wanted to be a congressman. But his relationship that he developed with Mo Udall was probably the best benefit from those years in the House. He learned, Mo took him under his wing. That was in the days when bipartisanship really was part of the Congress. And Mo took him under his wing, taught John about the land in Arizona, taught him about the Native Americans, really what they were and why we have to protect them. Really made John the Arizonan that he is in so many respects. It is greatly, almost completely due to Mo Udall. So those kinds of things, but he knew he wanted to go on. When he got into the House, he realized he really did want to be a senator. And so that was, the next step was when Barry Goldwater retired. Yeah, Mo was the guy. And you know, in the later years when Mo was so ill, John never missed a week he'd go see him. He never missed a week. And he said, sometimes I knew he was there and sometimes I didn't know if he was there, but somehow he always perked up when I walked in. So. I was born and raised in Arizona. I grew up on not only the legend and the honor of knowing Barry Goldwater, but when I was in high school, I toilet papered his house. And I told him that one night at a big Republican dinner. Yeah, of course, I knew Barry. I knew Barry in large part because of my father. And he's a legend. He is Arizona in so many ways. He's part of what real Arizona was about, like Mo. You've heard the stories about Mo's family and Barry's family and what they did for each other in the early years of our state. Barry was an incredible guy, but he was older. He didn't feel well, and that weighed on him a great deal. And it weighed on John because Barry had been such an amazing person. When Barry was in his later years and was really not going to live very much longer, Susan called us and said, I'm going to let you know when it's time to come. I want you to come. And she called, and we went, and it was a beautiful summer day, as I remember, because it was hot during the funeral, so it was a summer day. We went up to their house, which sat on a huge hill in Arizona, in Phoenix, and his bed was up against this glorious glass window that overlooked the entire valley, a valley of which he took the tractor to drag the airport strip. He's the one that made that drug part of the road for the freeway. I mean, he's the one that laid out, he and the city fathers laid out Phoenix and Arizona. And he was in bed looking at it and checking with Susan to make sure he was home and all those things. And John and I walked in. And, you know, John still isn't sure whether Barry recognized him or not, but he said hello, and they chatted a bit and all that, and for a few minutes, and it came time to leave. And Barry grabbed my hand, and because we'd been sitting very close to him, he grabbed my hand, and I grabbed it back and held it. And, you know, he was kind of looking and talking a bit, and you know, not making a lot of sense, you know, nothing that we were talking about, but just kind of reminiscing a bit and all of that. But he wouldn't let go. And not that I wanted him to let go, but he wouldn't let go until finally I realized I really had to, there were other people there. I really gently kind of took my hand away and patted him and gave him a kiss. And we walked out and he died that night. And Susan Goldwater was so funny because when that happened, she said, you know, Barry always loved a pretty woman. It was just such a touching moment. It really was a moment I'll always remember. Barry was supportive. Like a lot of things, Barry had been there a long time, and he had his team of supporters. And a lot of them were skeptical. A lot of them didn't like the idea that a person that hadn't been in the state very long would run for Barry Goldwater's seat. But once John was elected, it was just fine. It really was. There was never a rift between Barry and John. It was more staff to staff, and you know how that, how all that goes. And if you think about it, there'd only been one other senator, I think, because he took Carl Hayden's seat, I believe, and then John took Barry's seat. So we're a young state. But yeah, and what an honor to be able to take the seat of a man like Barry Goldwater. Or borrow, I should say, not take the seat, to enjoy the seat that he held. He keeps his desk. He sits at Barry's desk every day. Also, besides the desk in John's office, are a series of photographs of Native Americans that Barry took and that Barry gave to John. And these are from the 40s. That he took while he was rafting the river, 70th person to raft the Colorado River. What a wonderful reminder of why we're there and what this is all about. It's wonderful. I lived here the first year he was in Congress, and then we got pregnant with Megan, and that was second term, and so it was. I wasn't unhappy not to be in Washington. This is a tough town. And we wanted our kids to be raised out there. So I wanted my kids to experience and know the best of Washington, D.C., not the ugly side. And so for us, it was never a question. It was a great move. I really am an Arizona person. I don't like the cold weather, so. Well, the campaign for Senate obviously was different. I mean, I'm stating the obvious just with the job, but the campaign was so much bigger. And it was statewide, clearly, but the ability to get around statewide, still with not many communication. I mean, you had a phone, but you didn't have a cell phone, you know, all those things, was a challenge. And it was, they wanted to see John McCain. They didn't want to see a surrogate, although they liked having me. They really wanted to see and touch him and really know who this guy is. So the challenge was getting him around and making sure that we hit every place in Arizona, and we did. It was a fun race in that respect, but it was also a taste of later races. I mean, a statewide race is nothing to sneeze at. I wouldn't want to run in California. Let's put it that way. You couldn't slow him down. Nothing slows him down. And he was, I mean, he's one of the most vibrant people I've ever met. And so what they saw was a man that had been badly injured and was doing just fine and was loving doing what he was doing, which I thought was an important message. You know, he never complains. He never complains about anything. We had not kept accurate enough records. We had records, but it just didn't, we had not done a good job of records. So flying on airplanes and things, although we reported it, anyway, it didn't work. We didn't do it the right way. And of course, the meeting. He went in, when he walked, he still tells me, when he walked in the door of that meeting that had been arranged for this, he knew that this was going to be a problem because there were too many senators there. There was a regulator there. And Charlie Keating was sitting there. I mean, it was not good. It was not good. And as a result, it grew, as you know. I mean, this became the Keating Five. A special person was appointed to hold the hearings and all these kinds of things. And it tarnished his honor in his mind. It was about his honor and his dignity and his. Anyone that knows him knows that he's human. You make mistakes, but in this case, he is not the man that was being depicted publicly in the Washington Post, New York Times, and everything. So that really tore him up, and it tore me up. I blame myself for a lot of it because of the record keeping. You know, I blame myself for not doing a better job or doing something about it. And it was a couple of years worth of torture, I'll be honest with you, but for both of us. I mean, we sat in the hearing room. The hearings took place day in and day out. And watching my husband being dressed down by people, in my opinion, that couldn't hold a candle to him, killed me. I mean, it broke my heart. And it stalled him a bit. Not stalled, but just kind of, it was that notch. It was obviously, it was not a good time for any of us. I mean, I became ill. I got into, I was medicating myself. I mean, it was all, it did a number on both of us. And only to realize that in later years it made both of us stronger and certainly better at what we do. But that, life hands you things that you don't expect, and you just do the best you can. And that was certainly true with him, and he did an amazing job. And I wish I'd done better, I'll be honest with you. It's Keating genuinely, we got to know him during the Senate race, and Keating, in my opinion, genuinely liked John because he was a naval officer. He'd been in the Navy, and Charlie Keating had been in the Navy, and so they shared this kind of common bond. And so we never, John is the most believing person ever until you prove him wrong. And then, John believed it. He trusted him a great deal. And then when we realized that this was not at all what this was about, then it became, it was a very dark period in our family. I mean, and you know the results. You know what happened with Lincoln Savings and everything else. Well, Keating 5 thing was, John was slapped on the hand. He was given a written letter, as you know, that slapped him on the hand. The other guys took it a lot harder because they'd done a lot more. But then the Lincoln Savings and Loan issue blew up, and you find out that there are other things going on too. And both of us, it just blew us both away. We just didn't understand, and it was really hard to get your arms around. But we thought he was a friend, and that was not the case. He is his own worst critic on everything and holds himself to a higher standard. He really does. He tries his hardest to be the best, but do the most honorable thing. And that was just it was a mess. I mean, it was a real mess. And then for hearings to occur and all the publicity and all the stuff that went on, it was a hard time. It was a real hard time. When my husband came home after he'd retired and we moved back out to Arizona, my father employed him, and he gave him a job that it wasn't described as public relations, but it enabled John to get to know the business and get around. And so it was fun. It also gave John the latitude that he could use to think about what he was going to do next and all those things. I knew he wasn't going to be a beer man forever. I knew that. But it was a lovely thing for my father to do, and John enjoyed it. And then, of course, about a year later, Rhodes announced he was retiring, and then the rest is history. I think campaign finance reform resulted on his part as a result of what happened at the Keating 5, what the imperfections in the campaign finance laws, the inability or ability to give money in a certain, more so than what it should have been, the influence of money. John saw it firsthand. It wasn't a good thing, and I think campaign finance reform was certainly a part of that experience. It wasn't all of it, but it was a part of it. He saw a system that was really corrupt and really needed to be reformed. And as you know, they got it passed, and then the Supreme Court overruled it. So He worked, as you know, the person that worked with him, the Democrat, was Feingold, Senator Feingold from Wisconsin. And Senator Feingold used to joke that when he'd go through an airport, they would call him McCain Feingold because they thought his first name was McCain. The two of them worked beautifully together on that issue and on that law, and it was hard work too. It was really hard work. As a result of it, the Kennedy Center gave us, the Kennedy School up in Boston, gave John and Senator Feingold the Profiles in Courage Award. Excuse me for not remembering. Profiles in Courage Award, and that was really special. That was because Teddy was still alive then, and it was just a special time. Well, for a number of reasons. Number one, just the legacy of the award. I mean, of the award. It's a tremendous honor. And number two, the Kennedy family. He was very close. Had been all through the years with Ted Kennedy. They agreed on almost nothing, but they were friends because they could fight, they could argue, they could disagree, they could, lobby back and forth with each other, and still be friends. And fight like the Dickens on the floor and still be friends. That's what the Senate used to be like. And I was so privileged to be able to watch that on occasion too. It was a wonderful thing to see. And so he respected and loved Teddy like a brother. He went right to the heart of who John is and what drives him and what makes him who he is. It was a very special weekend for us. I think he thought he could make a difference, and I believe he could have. It was a time in our country that it was before 9/11, but John saw things in the world and certainly in the country that he thought he could be helpful and change, make some changes that were good. We call that the fun campaign. It was before Twitter, it was before Facebook, it was before all this 24-hour news that's just has absorbed this country. It was about real issues and about really campaigning, physical campaigning. We call it hands-on and retail politics. It was fun. It was really, and New Hampshire, which is where we spent most of our time, was incredible. South Carolina was a different story when we moved on. It was the Straight Talk Express. And it was a crappy bus. It was really bad, but it was our Straight Talk Express. We had it. John sat in the back of the bus every day, surrounded by reporters. Anyone got a turn. It was small back there, so they'd have to rotate him in and out. And I developed a relationship with the photographers because they were always on the bus. And so I got to know these Pulitzer Prize-winning men. There were 3 of them on the campaign that were amazing. I mean, just their stories and just everything about them. They were very creative. And they'd sometimes ask me if I wanted to tweak the photograph just because I was looking tired that day. So I'd take them, whatever you can do, yeah. But it was fun because we knew them. We got to know their families. We got to know, a lot about it. We were a family together. You become that in any campaign, especially tough ones, really. Bring out the best or the worst in people. Election night in New Hampshire, we never ever expected. We got a hint as the polls were closing that we might be doing okay, but we never ever dreamed we'd get those kind of points, ever. And it was a testimony to John's ability to get a straight talk message out to people. And New Hampshire, New Hampshire's all about retail politics. They want to see you. Not just once, but 2 or 3 times. They want to touch you. They want to ask you questions. And John's really good at that. And he likes it. He loves it. And so it paid off in New Hampshire. It paid off. Well, obviously beating George Bush in that first race so handily, the way we did in New Hampshire, obviously fired up his guys. And so we moved on to South Carolina, and the next thing we knew, still to this day, the dirtiest campaign I've ever experienced was that one in South Carolina. For instance, there was a flyer sent around to churches and to people. Did you know that Senator McCain has a black child? Hell yes, we do, and proud of it. But that's the kind of thing, it was this fear-mongering stuff that quite frankly, Karl Rove and others did on that campaign. It was really, I won't use the word unfair because it's politics, but it was really unkind. And it was unkind to the voters because that was a lie. I mean, it was a loving daughter that, and unfortunately about 3 or 4 years later, my daughter Googled herself and found that. And so I spent the next 3 or 4 days explaining to her, no, the president doesn't hate you. No, he doesn't think that you're bad because you're black. No. But I mean, that's a traumatic thing for a child. And that's where I resent what they did, is because of the aftermath that they caused in that race. My husband may be more gracious than I am, but I'm still mad about it. So I hold grudges. He was asked about the Confederate flag and whether or not it should be taken down. And, the governor and the AG and the people from South Carolina that were in leadership positions at that time were lobbying him to say, no, it shouldn't be taken down. And against his better judgment, and he says this, I know you've talked to him about it, but against his better judgment, he said, leave it up. And as soon as he did it, he goes, this is a bad mistake. Not politically, it was the wrong thing. It was the wrong image. It was wrong for the people of South Carolina. And so he felt like he'd done a disservice to the folks of South Carolina and regrets it to this day. And it's one of those, it's a mistake, not a light one, and it was a wrong one at the time, but he clearly, where he stands now and says he should have said it at the time. Yeah, he went back. It was his idea to go back and talk about it. It was his. It took longer to get me to South Carolina, back to South. It took Lindsey Graham saying, "Come on, I'll be right there with you," because I was still so hurt by what happened. But John took it head on, went back, said, "No, I was wrong. This is what I should have said. I really," not that he meant anything differently, but he said, "I was wrong," and admitted he was wrong. But that's who John is. He admits when he makes mistakes and says he was wrong, and that's what we love about him. That's what I love about him. The campaign was different for many reasons in 08. Number one, there was a war going on. Number two, Twitter and Facebook were starting to pick up speed. The 24-hour news cycle is incestuous on these campaigns. And then, of course, the fall of the stock market and the bottom fell out of the economic arena in the United States. It was, for John, he said that he knew the day that the stock market fell that we were in trouble and that we probably weren't going to win it. But he kept on fighting, obviously. It had nothing to do with Barack Obama at all. Barack Obama was a good candidate and a good campaigner. And it was just the circumstances. They're both good men. John defended Barack Obama when a woman tried to imply that he was Muslim and a bad person if he's Muslim, and should he run for president, those kinds of things. You saw the clips from New Hampshire. I would have expected nothing less from John when that woman said that. I knew he was going to blast her, and he should have. He wasn't quite blasting. He was kind about it, but he let her have it. And he should have. That's not right. There's no room in politics for things like that. At least there wasn't in those days. But the idea of 24-hour news and the idea that he was a very charismatic candidate. He was the first African-American candidate. Now, that's not the reason he should have been president, but it was certainly part of it, and that was a good thing. It was a great thing for America. It was, it just wasn't in the cards for us, and that's okay. And we knew that. As John liked to say, people say, well, how'd you feel afterwards? Well, I'd wake up every 2 hours and cry like a baby. Wake up every 2 hours, cry like a baby. It was a good race, though, and John ran a really honorable race in that one, as he does all the time. But he ran an honorable race, and I was very proud of him. I've never seen him more eloquent, I should say, than the night that he gave his concession speech in Arizona. What words? I mean, it was not only John McCain, but it was the future. He was talking about the future of our country. It was wonderful. There were a lot of people with a lot of input into whether or not, who we picked for vice president, et cetera. And, John wanted someone that would, first of all, be good for the country, number one, but that he could work with, and that they could be a team together. And there were a lot of people that fit that bill. There were a lot of people. In Sarah's case, he saw something in her that was invigorating. She invigorated our campaign. She got huge crowds in our campaign. She was vocal, and she was straight talking the way he is. And there were problems also. Every campaign has problems. But she did a hell of a job. And the choice of Sarah Palin, we would do it again, because at that time, it was the right thing to do. She was viscerally treated by the press corps. If things had been reversed, and that had been Hillary Clinton, I don't think they would have chewed her up the way they chewed up Sarah Palin. I thought that was terribly unfair. I thought it was sexist, too. Just because she was a woman, they were beating the crap out of her, and there was no reason. Issues, yes. Because she's a woman, no. We got along great. I got along great with Todd, because that's really who I traveled with. It was a lot of fun. It was interesting. No one had ever traveled with a male counterpart before. He's a lovely man, and someone who is a great outdoorsman and just really loves Alaska, and was a little overwhelmed with what was going on, understandably, but loves his wife and is true to form, very loyal to her. I suspected something, because there were just little things that were telling me something wasn't right with him. So he had a physical coming up, and we made sure that the schedule was such that it couldn't be pushed. It couldn't be, because we thought it needs to be looked at. So, just see what's going on there. Maybe it's nothing, but of course now you know the outcome of it. I found out the gravity of it. I was in San Diego when he went to the physical, and I got this convoluted phone call from him that was, he wasn't lying to me, but he was kind of lying to me, saying, yeah, I'm going to go back. It's a melanoma, a little melanoma or something like that on my forehead. And I said, well, will you let me know if there's anything? I can come home very easily. And then I got a phone call from Rick Davis, who, as you know, is a good friend of ours and former campaign manager, that said, you need to get home now. And I said, well, what is it? Do you know what it is? I don't know, but you need to come home now. And he was already in Arizona, so I flew home immediately. And John was just coming out of surgery when I got home, and the physicians pulled me into a room, with Rick and with others, and explained to me what was going on. I still didn't understand the difficult nature of what he had. I understood that we were in trouble, but I didn't understand the gravity of it. It hadn't hit me yet. And John, I go into John's room, and they're all telling me these things. I go in there, he's wide awake, he's talking to the nurses, he's telling them what year it is. I mean, he did some amazing things that day that brain surgery patients don't do. But he went home the next day. So I thought, oh, it can't be that bad. Look at him. And then, of course, we got a different set of news a little bit later. Well, we had all, the word glioblastoma had been used, but only in the manner, it could be, it couldn't be, we don't know, we're not sure. And then our physician came, or his physician came to our house and sat down and explained exactly what, it was after the MRI and how they let it settle down and all this stuff, and explained to us exactly what it was, and that this is going to be difficult. This is going to be hard. I still, although it hit me, obviously everyone's terribly upset, but I just looked at him and I think, look at him. He looks fine. This can't be, it's not happening. It took me a while. It took me a while to really grasp what was going on. And then as miracles happen, all of our friends started showing up, our good friends, our close friends, and we all went to the cabin, and we were all there for, 4 or 5 days, and just talked and, ate and, enjoyed each other's company, and that was very helpful for me. He wants nobody to pull any punches with him. He wants to know exactly what it is, what the chances are, all those things. That's how he is. That's who he is. And that's what he wanted. And the only time he really gets mad is when he thinks people aren't telling him the truth or kind of sugarcoating it a bit. And that week that our friends were there, that we were up there, he was very upfront about it. Look, these are the chances. These are the, he was talking, because our friends were all upset too, and so he was calming them. And calming me. He was the one being the one that was taking this and leading with it, as always. John was a little angry at the doctor. The doctor certainly told us what it was and said, you have a lot of options and these kinds of things. And really wanted to hear chances, wanted to hear timing, And no doctor's going to do that right away. And we had to explain to him, look, you know everything that we know, and you know everything right now. And as we've gone on, as things have progressed and things have changed, he's learned more now. And they're being very upfront with him. But in the beginning, I don't think he heard it all either. I think we were all in kind of disbelief. It just, it's a lot to absorb. It's like drinking from a fire hose with this. The treatment was proton radiation at Mayo Clinic in Phoenix, combined with chemotherapy. And it's a standard form of treatment for this kind of tumor. And and of course they'd operated on him, so the tumor was gone. It was whether or not it could be, whether or not it would grow back or anything, and it didn't. So in that respect, we're lucky, but you have to keep going in this because this is a very vicious disease. So we're continuing, different treatments and things, and, we'll do the best we can with it. He not only knew he should go back, he needed to go back for him. He wanted people, number one, to know, he was, with this issue, it was important. And number two, that he's not gone yet. We're here, and he's tough, and the importance of the job and the importance of respecting the United States Senate, and those are things that are important to him. And so he argued back and forth with the doctors, and the pros and cons, and we all argued. I don't mean loudly argued, just discussed and weighed back and forth, and he dug in and said, nope, I'm going back. So we did, and against his doctor's orders, but look what happened, and we're so glad he did come back for it. But I saw it with the rest of the nation. That's how I saw his vote. I didn't know what his vote was going to be. I saw my husband step on the Senate floor in the middle of the night, and the last person to vote, and then do this. And I was like everyone, wow, okay, that's what he's done, okay. good. You know, that's what he believes, and that's great, and when we support him 100%. But the amount of pressure that they had put on him, the vice president was back in the back room. They had the governor of Arizona in the back room. The governor of Arizona had supported John's negative call until late in the game, and then turned, flipped. And so the amount of pressure that was put on him was really tremendous, and he did the right thing. As always, he did the right thing. As he said time and time again, it's rule of order. It's what legislation is. This is a package that was never put in front of the Senate, never amended, never given hearings. John's offended by that. That's not how the Senate operates, and that's not how our forefathers wanted the Senate to operate. So he was offended by that. He was offended by how it was jammed down everyone's throat, and said all along, the merits of the bill are some things, and he has problems with the merits of the bill to a great degree and what it could do to our own home state of Arizona. But just the way that it was done was very offensive. Now, I say that he and Lindsey Graham are still very good friends. And they as you saw Lindsey during the town hall the other night, spoke eloquently about my husband. This isn't about personalities or friendships. This is about a disagreement in what this is, what this issue is. Lindsey and John will be friends forever, and they're two guys that have too much history. So people that were betting that this would break their friendship up are way wrong on that. He hates the way that things have become so divisive and so personal. The kind of skirting the rules thing really offends him. Because he chairs a committee that's very important and would never think of doing something without hearings and pro forma, and the way that it's done here. So those kinds of things really bother him and really offend him. And I get that. He's dedicated his entire life to service to our country, and it's important to him. They're all different. The older ones in John's children are very good. They've all come out to see him. We've all been together. We text back and forth. I let them know every stage of the game what's going on. Meghan McCain it's been very difficult for her. She's had a hard time with this, and understandably, and so she deals with it by cooking. So we've been well fed for a long time now. Jack he's my stoic one, and he's dealing with it, but he deals with it internally. My son Jimmy is the lovable, laughable guy that he always is, and it's breaking his heart. And Bridget although understands it, I think she's trying to ignore it. I think she thinks if she does, it'll go away. It's all different. Day by day, hour by hour, I just do the best I can. I have to be there for John. I'm the one person that has to be a constant here. And so I look at him, and he's so strong. I have to be. I can't be anything less than strong for him. So I just do the best I can. I've had my moments, though, where I've went away and, gone and kicked the door or cried a bit or whatever. But for him, I can stay strong. He's tempered a bit. He was a young Navy pilot when I met him. He was in Navy liaison, but he was a, pretty cocky kind of guy. And he's mellowed a great deal in that respect. He's learned a great deal about himself. He has come into the understanding of legacy and honor, as we talked about. And not that that wasn't there before, but the strength of it, how you can gain strength from it, and how it can guide you as well. He's learned good lessons and bad lessons in that way. And he's become much more thoughtful with all of us, the kids. I don't know if his staff would agree, but with the family, he's just thoughtful and much more. He's just caring. It would be a good way to put it. He's much more caring now. Oh my gosh, I can't say words enough. I mean, he is such an incredible person, and what a life I've had with him. I mean, I never thought I'd be doing this. I'm so proud of him because he's made tough decisions, not just in the Senate, but in other ways. I mean, with family, with everything, and he's just such a strong, honorable person. I'm so proud of him in every way you can be. Even when he doesn't pick his socks up off the floor, I give him some slack. There were too many times he could have died. I know he's faced this before. Obviously in prison, the obvious being in prison. No, I don't think he is. I think what he wants to make sure of is that he has served his country proudly and honorably, and that he's done his best. And I think that's all he would ask for. I think he's had moments where maybe he thought he could have done more in certain ways, but no, he's not afraid. He's not afraid to die. I think his legacy is going to be one of, gosh, you know, we knew he was good when he was here, but wow, look what he really did when people start to look back. And hopefully that won't be for a long time. But I believe what he's done for Arizona, the strength and the leadership that he has exhibited, that people look to and depend on, is what I think people really remember about him. And of course, his humor. He's a funny guy. Oh gosh, I think I will remember him as I think there's a photograph of John. And this sounds maybe a little bit strange, but there's a photograph that we have on our wall at home that's of John standing kind of on top of Squaw Peak Mountain in Arizona, and he's got cowboy boots on and jeans, but he's got his flight jacket on. And it's sunset, he's just overlooking the valley. But I think I'll remember him because he's seen what you can do if you try hard. He sees that you can be a part of something that's greater than you, and you can leave it in a better place. And that's kind of what I see in him. And that picture kind of exemplifies it for me completely. And it's one photograph on the wall. The one thing that I can say is that, again, I mentioned the hardest thing for me ever was watching my son deploy. But watching John's reaction to it, because he outwardly I never saw anything. I saw him nothing but strong, being the leader, you know, that he is, and all this kind of stuff. And then I heard the stories about when he landed in Baghdad to see, and Jimmy was there. He didn't land to see Jimmy, but Jimmy was part of him being able to stay or see him anyway. And he asked him, and there was this kid standing on the tarmac. That he was all alone. He was, you know, had a gun. Obviously, he was a Marine, and he looked. He said, "Who is that kid?" It was Jimmy, and he didn't recognize him. And of course, he got out. And from what Lindsay tells me, John was a blubbering mess. He'd never tell me that, but he said he was just so overwhelmed with his son. Burma is a dog that I gave John for Christmas about 3 years ago. And obviously a puppy, it's a Chesapeake Bay Retriever. And I had named it something else, and I walked into John's office in Phoenix to go hand him this dog. And oh, he just fell in love with the dog, and oh my God, this is amazing. And I said, and its name is this. And he said, nope, it's Burma, it's my dog. I go, okay. Burma is John's total companion. We could be up there weeks and weeks and weeks and John not be there, and Burma would be very attentive. And as soon as he walks in the door, he leaves everybody and goes straight for John. And I think Burma can sense there's a problem with John right now. There's an issue with him. I've been told that dogs can sense health and other things, so I think that Burma definitely senses something because he won't leave him. She won't leave him at all. It's great. I joked one time because during the campaign, the presidential race, the press scrum was huge. It became huge, and just my ability to even walk with him was becoming dangerous, actually. And I felt like I was with Mick Jagger or somebody. I mean, between the people and the press and it was nuts. It was crazy, and he still is like that. So.